Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and I'm here with Emma Johnson, one of the trainers on the Conscious Psychology Practitioner Training Program. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
And in this video, I just thought it'd be nice to get to know a little bit more about Emma, her own background, and some of the areas of psychology in the course that she's particularly passionate about. Emma, maybe, I know you've had a pretty fascinating journey over the years of psychology. Maybe a good starting point would be, where did it start for you? What was your kind of initial kind of taste of this world?
Well, I think I've always been interested in psychology and what makes people tick and people's emotions and stuff. And I think coming from my own childhood, I developed a fascination with what was going on for other people and what was going on for me. When I was 11, someone bought me Man Watching by Desmond Morris. I don't know if you ever heard of that book. He was an anthropologist and a psychologist. And he wrote a book which was really all about the sort of bridge between animals and humans and human behaviour and how it sometimes approximates animal behaviour and the crossover between the two. And he did a lot of work on body language and, you know, non-verbal communication, that sort of stuff. And it was sort of a pop psychology book, but it absolutely gripped me. And
At 11?
At 11.
Wow.
It had some great pictures in it.
Okay.
Things like, on one page there'd be a picture of a woman, the same picture of the same woman on the other page, but something was different and you had to say which one was more attractive, and it was because the pupil size in one of them was the pupil dilation was larger, and everyone chooses the same picture. Stuff like that, and it was done in a really easy way to grasp. And so at 11, I became fascinated with this book and everything it had to teach, and I knew it from cover to cover. In fact, I could probably tell you what was on page 47. Now, you know what I mean? That's how intimately I got to know this book. So that was sort of what really got me interested in reading about psychology. And then at school, I had a pretty mixed time. Didn't think I was much of an academic. Didn't enjoy academia at all, was always struggling with it. And at the end of school, everyone else went off to university and I became a truck driver.
I'd forgotten that. I did know that, but I'd forgotten it.
Yeah, I became a truck driver. I think I was sticking two fingers up at the whole education system.
I get it.
And I did that for a while, and it was great fun. And along the way, I picked up a few little bits of language. Then I went into another field where I was proofreading European languages, and that was okay, but there was something missing, and this psychology thing had been sort of ticking away in the back of my mind all those years, but never really found an expression for it. And so while I was working in the publishing business, I felt like my brain was setting like a jelly. So I thought, I need to do a course. And something drew me to an A-level psychology course. My A-levels had been a bit of a, what's a polite word?
Disaster?
Yeah, that's a good word. A bit of a disaster. Although I'd got some, but I hadn't done as well as I could have done.
Yeah.
And I was
you perhaps weren't passionate about it
at
at the time.
That's right. But I did this A-level psychology, and it was like a light bulb just went on. And suddenly I realised that actually, when it came to something I was interested in, I was quite academic. So I did really well in that. And during the year, they sent round some UCCA forms, as they were in the day, which was the application for university. And they said, oh, just fill it in, just in case. And so I filled it in, and I got offered places. So it was all a bit of a shock. Then I had a big decision to make. Do I give up this lucrative career that I had to go and study? And I decided to make that leap. And so I went and studied, and I started studying psychology and counselling psychology. And again, just absolutely loved every step of the way and just didn't want to stop. And actually, I haven't stopped.
Didn't want to stop, and you haven't stopped.
I'm a bit of a course junkie, and I just think that you never stop learning. And actually, when you do stop learning, what's the point? So I carry on learning, and you know, I've sort of taken that on into working in the field, into therapy, and working with psychology and mental health. Just got fascinated in that whole field. Had a trip round mental health law, which I found really fascinating. Learned quite a bit about that. and just carried on, really. And
Yeah.
now it's got to the point where I'm still learning, but I'm also enjoying passing that on to other people as well.
Yeah.
And what I realise is it's not mutually exclusive. So
Totally.
even when you're teaching, you're learning.
Right.
So happy
It's
days
often
all
the
round.
best way to learn in some ways. I mean, also, maybe if you can say a little bit about, you know, that learning wasn't just a theoretical thing, but it was also in your own life, that you were applying what you were learning. And I know you had some different, we all have our own challenges in life.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can say anything about the meeting of what you were learning with
Yeah.
your own developmental path.
Yeah, well, I think my own development, you know, there's a theory that we live our lives backwards and that our early experiences are there to guide us to where we need to get to. And certainly when I look back at my early experiences, I can see that my challenge was to learn how to deal with emotion and the emotional world. And for whatever reasons, and I'm not going to go into too much detail
Sure.
in this context, but for whatever reason, I found that emotions were pretty complex and other people's emotions were quite hard to come to grips with. And I struggled with that for a bit. When I started to read Desmond Morris, I think there was something in me at that point that was looking for answers to what was so confusing about my own earlier life. And I think that as I started to get answers, I started to feel better in myself. I think understanding something is so crucial to helping you deal with it and work through it. And for me, you know, knowledge is power.
Right.
And insight and understanding, for me, offered the key to freedom, emotional freedom, and sort of spiritual and psychological freedom.
Yes.
So I think the training that I did was an academic pursuit, but also an emotional and psychological and spiritual journey.
Yes.
And that continues, and I don't think it will ever stop.
Well, let's hope not. Yeah. And also, I know that in your professional life, you've worked with, I know that you studied more traditional psychotherapy counselling and then came on to fields like NLP and energy psychology and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I know that you've worked in some pretty intense environments in terms of the tools, in the kind of environments where people don't just agree with everything you say and people don't just kind of go, oh yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They really challenge. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah. I've always been drawn to challenging environments. Maybe it's one here. I think I've always been interested in edges.
Yes.
You know, and I like to stand on edges and look over the edge. And I've done that throughout my career. I've always seemed to gravitate towards the edgier sectors of this field.
Right.
So I worked in the beginning in various fields. I did several years in youth counselling, which was really rewarding, and perhaps also helped me to heal some of my own childhood stuff in the process. You know, all the heal thyself stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So working with young people was really good for me, and it provided me with a great basis for then what followed. Because young people often are on edges. You know, they're on so many edges. They're crossing this bridge between childhood and adulthood. It's pretty high up there sometimes, you know, and it's pretty scary.
And often we don't feel very well equipped for that transition.
Really under-resourced.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's perhaps what happened to me in my own adolescence, that I felt really under-resourced. So part of what was so meaningful to me in that was being a companion to someone else across that bridge.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was great work and great fun, a bit scary at times, all the ethical stuff that comes up when you're working with young people. You know, it is edgy work. And around the same time and sort of following that, I went even deeper, even closer to the edge in a way. I did quite a lot of work with a rape and sexual abuse support centre and worked with some pretty heavy stuff there. This was in the early 90s. And there was a lot going around that time around ritual abuse, which was the heaviest of stuff to work with. And I did a lot of work then on a helpline. So I was on the end of a helpline listening to people who were working through terrible traumas, some people who were still being abused. and some people who the actual abuse may have stopped, but it never really stopped in their body and their mind.
Sure.
So they were reliving it, and there was lots of trauma involved in that work.
And very difficult to hold someone in that at such a distance as well.
It is, and you know, there were times in that work where I felt really close to the edge myself. And times when I had to really find my grounding and struggled to find my ground and to stand firm, because you're hearing about some outrageous and just appalling stuff. And to hold on to your own ground and your own reality in that is a real challenge. So I had to question myself a lot during that work. Again, learned a lot through that process and did that for about 5 years. I also worked around the same time, because I worked for various different agencies at the same time, and I also worked for an HIV and AIDS charity, doing support work with them. And this was at a time when HIV and AIDS were a death sentence. So
and had a cultural stigma, which still has some, but not like it was back then.
Absolutely. It was before they had all these wonderful drugs that they now have that can send people into HIV negative. So, you know, people were facing a pretty grim future in those days. So there was, you know, a lot of work around facing death and bereavement, because other people had friends who'd gone before them, and so there was a lot of loss involved in that. So again, you know, looking right into the darkness sometimes. So that was the sort of stuff I did in the early days. And I guess it was sort of a natural progression that took me into mental health, because all of the above, everything I've just discussed, for some people results in some pretty severe mental health challenges. And, you know, having had some of my own experiences growing up and within my family of mental health issues, it seemed like a fairly natural progression to go into that field. So for 15 years, I worked in a mental health environment, working both with people living in the community. I used to run a rehabilitation group for people who were long-term in institutional care, in psychiatric units, and we used to go out on day trips, and I used to drive everyone out on the minibus.
Truck driving days came in handy.
It was relevant. Nothing is accidental. Yes, I used to drive the bus, used to take people out, we used to go to museums, we used to go down to Brighton for the day, just to really help people reintegrate into life again. And we had a lot of fun doing that. It was never a dull moment.
Sure, I bet.
Sometimes things are pretty random, but, you know, I had some great times and a lot of respect for those people and the journey that they were on in trying to live again, having been institutionalized for so long.
And also an amazing opportunity to take the tools, the kind of tools, for example, you're teaching on the training course, into a setting where it's the extreme, in a sense, of the potential for those tools to be used of people.
Absolutely, because these tools are universal. You know, whether we're talking about sort of traditional talking treatment tools, or whether we're talking about some of the more progressive ones, like NLP or EFT, for example. It was in those days that, in fact, I really needed EFT, and it wasn't around then. It was just starting. But as I look back, if I'd have had EFT back then, some of the stuff I could have done, you know, talking about the rape and sexual abuse work, or the youth counselling, or the HIV and AIDS work.
And also, I guess, supporting yourself as a practitioner, holding all of that material.
Absolutely, because, you know, self-care is key in all of this work. And the tools that we're teaching people are not only tools that you can use with clients, but they are tools that you can use to support yourself and work through issues that arise as a result of the work that you're doing. So, yeah, all round, those tools are extremely helpful. And I wish I'd had some of the more progressive ones in those early days. But in those early days, mainly what I had was traditional talking treatment. And I was sort of more interested in humanistic type work. So I did a lot of work, for example, with the youth counselling agency. We worked in a person-centred way, which was really permissive and really facilitating the sort of development of the young person's self.
Yes.
So that tool was really useful in that environment. I took it further. I got quite interested in transpersonal work, which is sort of the thick end of humanistic therapy, where you're dealing not just with the personal, not just with the unconscious, but also the conscious and the superconscious.
Like, who are you beyond?
Yeah. Who are you beyond the personal?
Yeah.
And what happens beyond this bag of skin that we call ourselves, but is still somehow us?
Yeah.
So that stuff was really helpful and certainly quite informative when it comes to mental health work. You know, I'm very interested in Stan Grof and his work with spiritual emergency. And how, you know, obviously the NHS and the medical profession medicalizes and pathologizes some of these experiences that in other cultures would be seen as spiritual emergence. Right. So fascinated with all of that and sort of had to somehow negotiate the line between the medical model, which I was largely embedded in most of the time, but also my fascination and interest and real belief in.
And what people most needed, potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while I didn't go crashing in to the medical model with this stuff, I took it with me, and it was often quietly there in the background.
Yes.
And, you know, when I worked in mental health, I worked for 15 years in mental health, including the community, but also in high-security psychiatric units. And I took this quietly with me. And I was always a great admirer of R.D. Laing, who, as you probably know, founded the anti-psychiatry movement, even though he was himself a psychiatrist. And I was fascinated by his take on things, and had to somehow balance that with the model that I was embedded in.
Which is, I think, also working in some of those environments, part of what I think is also so fascinating is that, you know, we talk about, you know, there's the joke in therapy of how many therapists say to change a light bulb. Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. And you're working in a high security environment. People don't even want to be there. They don't want to be in a room with you.
Absolutely.
And then how you work with those clients. I mean, again, talk about taking these tools to the edge of what's possible.
Yes. Although I was quite lucky in that I worked in that environment as an independent.
Yes.
So that meant I was seen as someone from the outside, which was
you
very...
You weren't the system, yeah.
Yeah, and also what I was doing, because of the sphere I worked in, which was in the context of working with a team of mental health lawyers, and our job was to put people in front of a mental health review tribunal in a way that would somehow portray them in a different way to the way they were being portrayed within the system, as sick, as dangerous.
Helping them free themselves from the stigmas.
Yes. So what we were trying to do was give the other side of the story.
Yes.
So the clients I had in those places knew that I was coming from a place of trying to help them get what they want.
Yes.
So I found that actually the door was largely open to me. And some of the time I was on a pedestal, and some of the time I got ripped off that pedestal and I was in the gutter. So, you know, I've been in both places.
Right.
But you know, a lot of the tools that I use now are things that I learned just by being in very difficult situations with people, trying to get them out of a very deep and sticky hole.
I mean, you've had an incredibly rich and diverse background, let's say, in these tools. And I guess I'm curious in terms of where you are at this point in terms of your own practice, but also in terms of your teaching. What really lights you up? Like what you feel most passionate about, you know, with all the things that you study, all the environments that you've worked in?
I think in a way it's like a stick of rock with the same thing running through it all the way through, which is just the exhilaration and joy of seeing someone change in a way that they want. You know, and seeing people get what they want. Against the odds as well at times. You know, people are starting, as I said, in a really deep hole, and seeing them not only be able to negotiate their way out of that hole with our help, of course, because we're not doing it. You know, as Gary Craig in EFT says, through me, not by me. But the privilege that it is to be that person's companion in their journey. I hate that word, but you know, it
Yeah,
sort of
sure.
does
It's
fit.
the word that works, yeah.
Yeah, it works because you're not leading them, you're not pushing them along, you're
Right.
walking with them, sometimes holding a torch for them, and that's how I see myself most usefully
Yes.
as a therapist. And that's what I get the biggest kick out of, is to sharing some of that journey with people and seeing them not only get out of the hole and stand on level ground again, but then start to reach for the stars.
Yeah.
And that's what really lights me up, when you see that it's not just about curing disorders or dis-ease, but it's also about potential and possibilities. And I think the tools that we've got now, and the tools that I'm so lucky to be involved in teaching, you know, hypnotherapy, NLP, EFT, those tools are about both. They're both about freeing yourself from the demons of the past, but also reaching forward into the future and into the possibilities and of everything you can become.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can share any bit of that journey with our clients. You know, we can be the bit from the hole to the ground, or we can be the bit from the ground up towards the stars. We can share any part of that journey, and it truly is a privilege and brings so much excitement. And again, just as it was in the early days, no 2 days are the same, and no two clients are the same, and even no 2 sessions with the same client are the same.
Yeah. And say something also about the teaching side of it. How that is for you, with the, you know, the immense knowledge you've got, but also, you know, you're saying about kind of helping people, bring people out of the pit and then reaching for the stars. There's something, I guess, about the teaching side that also it's spreading that knowledge and that wisdom.
Yes, because, you know, so many people who are training as therapists are coming from a wound. And that, you know, we have this whole concept of the wounded healer. And I think that it's a natural progression to heal yourself and then become interested in being the companion in someone else's healing, a guide, as it were, in someone else's healing. But then that progression doesn't stop there, because it can go even further into teaching. So just as we learn to heal ourselves and then we learn to heal others, so we can then move into helping other people not only heal, but also learn to help others. So it's just a whole natural progression, and it's seamless, and it merges quite a bit. You know, you can sometimes be working with someone in a therapeutic context, and then a while later, when they've got to a place of healing and they're ready, they then want to train in this stuff. So you meet them again on another level of the journey, another leg. And that's fantastic to watch those people evolve into great therapists themselves.
I mean, one of the things that I found fascinating is having people that have been patients become students, become practitioners within the organisation. And it's like, you know, 3 levels, and then actually seeing them going out and working with others. It's beautiful seeing the impact of that. And maybe as a final question, I'm curious as to where you would like to see all of this work move in the future. I mean, you've been around this field for a long time and you've been involved in lots of different areas. What do you see as the potential for some of these ideas?
For some of the therapeutic techniques that we
especially,
use?
and I know especially the energy therapy side, the EFT side, you're particularly passionate about.
I'm really passionate about energy psychology. I think because it's so cutting edge and it's so evolving at the moment. You know, even Gary Craig, the originator, is evolving his own technique all the time, and he's now moving into this idea of optimal EFT, which sort of relates back to the transpersonal stuff that I was talking about earlier. So I really like the idea of using these techniques to access and maximize our being in the transpersonal realm. But also, specifically with EFT, I love the idea of it spreading as a tool across the world. And Gary Craig's done a fantastic job of this because, you know, through the internet, he has managed to disseminate this information worldwide. And I can't remember how many different languages. It's something like 32 different languages that his manual is now translated into. And he says he wants a tapper in every household.
Okay, that's very good.
Yeah, and you know, I really go with that because I just think that if we can teach children and educate children in some of this stuff, I think emotional literacy is really lacking
I agree.
in our education system. And I've seen what children can do with tapping. I've done quite a bit of work with little guys and girls with tapping and using the tapping bear. Have you seen that, the teddy bear? Yeah, and seen them really get some great shifts. And the thing is with children is their energy system is so fluid and changes so quickly. So you can get some really quick shifts with them. And I've taught my own children to tap, and they have taught some of their friends at school how to tap. So when someone falls over and is hurt, there'll be one little bod tapping on another little bod.
Very sweet.
And I just think how fantastic to give these people, these growing people, a tool at a young age to deal with all this emotional stuff. Maybe unlike us, they're not going to need to end up in a therapist chair in 20 years' time because of the wounds that they sustained in their childhood. Maybe they can deal with them as they happen. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think in both ways, both working with children and teaching young people how to work with their emotions. Sort of takes me back to the youth counselling that I did in the beginning. There's so many circles in this stuff, So, yeah, working with children and educating them in emotions, I think is really interesting, and I think that NLP is a great tool for that because children adapt instantly to NLP. And you've only got to ask a child to tell you about a television program they watched and they're instantly in a trance.
I know, it's amazing.
So, this stuff
Harry Potter was so successful because it was so hypnotic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that children are natural for this stuff, and it's great to know that they can grow up in a different way. But also taking it into the transpersonal realm and into the realm of possibilities and what we are and what we could be in our wholeness, in our entirety. That's where I really see these tools going next.
Yeah, great.
So,
Emma, it's such a joy. I love it. I know there's so much experience that you have, and it's why it's such a privilege to have you on the training course as well. So thank you very much for this and for that. Thank you everyone for watching, and we look forward to talking to you again, hopefully very soon. Bye-bye.